Hi everyone, Professor Snart checking in here. I'm doing casual Thursday, as you can see from the sweet John Deere shirt that I'm rocking today. Okay, so we are really getting into basically the last part of our class, the last few units, all having to deal with your writing of the final essay. So the last units are kind of steps in that process. So just looking at the due dates, be aware of how things are working here. We have units 9, 10, and 11 to complete. The very last due date we have, which is when you're submitting the final essay, is Friday, July 29th. So basically the final essay is assigned or explained in Unit 9, which is coming up due Friday, July 22nd. This is this Friday or tomorrow if you're watching it today, my video today on Thursday. So basically for Unit 9, you're just beginning to develop a topic, and then through Unit 10, working through the writing process, so drafting, revising, rereading the text a little bit, obviously the research part, so just all of sort of that rolled into one, doing an outline as well, and then finally Unit 11, there's a peer response where you're able to exchange your essay within a group through Blackboard, and then of course you're submitting that final paper. So let me just click myself into Unit 9 here and draw your attention to, again, things that you can read yourself more carefully to make sure you're getting everything, but just some of the highlights here. Obviously, the text assigned for this unit is Death of a Salesman, which presents us with a really useful text for writing about in terms of the final essay. You're not required, however, to write about Death of a Salesman. It's just offered up as kind of an ideal text to use because it's fairly easy to read in terms of it being very, contemporary language, and it's not Shakespearean or something like that. The plot is fairly straightforward because it's really a play more about character than it is about, big events or action. There's lots of interesting themes going on. There's lots of really good secondary sources, which, there's nothing wrong with picking a primary text to work with for the final essay simply because it doesn't present any secondary source research problems. I mean, that's a legitimate, decision-making factor. So there's a lot to be said for writing about Death of a Salesman. Again, the research component, there's lots of themes to talk about or to choose from. In choosing a new work to write about, you're not inadvertently repeating yourself from previous writing that you don't want to do. So you don't have to choose Death of a Salesman, but it makes for a really good choice. Okay, so just looking at the final essay assignment then, it's sort of explained in terms of components here. The length is only 6 pages, which is really just a couple of pages longer than the essay that you've already written and revised. So in terms of scope, it's not like all of a sudden this humongous research project that you're taking on. So it's still a very narrowly focused discussion along the same lines that what we've been doing, a literary analysis. So you are developing your own topic, but you're not all of a sudden doing gun control good or bad or a research report on post-traumatic stress disorder or some just unrelated thing. You're developing a topic along the lines of what we've already been working with throughout the course. So the other thing to highlight then is the secondary source requirements. So you need a minimum of 4 secondary sources. And it's said right here, but I'll remind you, a primary source does not count as a secondary source. So a primary source is like the play, one of the short stories, those primary texts. Secondary source is obviously material from a database, maybe a library book that's like a critical discussion of one of the primary texts. So one of the things that you're showing me in terms of gathering these sources and just getting the correct number and type is simply that you understand one of those core concepts from the class, which is the difference between a primary and a secondary text. So again, the essay that you're turning in becomes this assessment device where it shows me the student either gets or doesn't get that concept. So it's like either right or wrong. There's no real gray area in there. In terms of the requirements for the secondary sources, nothing, just general website stuff. So again, we're sticking, if it's electronic, it's database material. At least one book source. So all you're going to do is go to the COD library catalog and type in, do a keyword search for Death of a Salesman, or a subject search for Death of a Salesman, or Miller, Arthur, if you want to do it that way, or whatever your primary text happens to be. Again, if you do this for the play, you get lots of results. If you were to do this for one of the short stories, say, I can't guarantee that you're going to get a lot, if any, results depending on how you do the search. So choosing to write about the play, again, is just useful if for no other reason that it enables you to do the research component a lot easier. So the book might be, again, a sort of literary discussion of Death of a Salesman, of the work of Arthur Miller. It's not just some kind of tangentially related thing about an idea like, post-war America or whatever. Certainly that's a kind of theme that shows up in the play, but that doesn't make that an appropriate secondary source. So at least one book source. At least one database source. This is pretty easy by now. We've done this a couple of times throughout the class. Again, just finding an appropriate, relevant database source for whatever primary text you happen to be using, whether it's the play or one of the short stories or a combination of both. So the database source, pretty easy. So that takes care of one book, one database. The remaining two can be appropriate sources of your choice. So probably most people will just use the databases because that's the most convenient. But if you happen to go to the library and pick that book out that you found in the catalog, what you'll find, and this is actually a legitimate research method, is that because books are cataloged, together, you may in fact, in finding one, find a couple of other books that look useful as well. So you may end up with multiple book sources for your secondary source, just as long as you have 4, at least one's a book, at least one's a database, and the other 2 are, again, appropriate and relevant to your topic. So you're not going to give me book, database, and then random web stuff or something from your sociology textbook. So again, it's really cut and dry at this point in terms of, do you get this or do you not get this? There's no sort of like doing it a different way or whatever. It's right or wrong. It's pretty objective in that sense. Okay, and of course, like I said before, if you have any questions about, is this a good source? Is it the right kind? Is it appropriate? Whatever, just ask, and then you know for sure. Send me an email. As far as the topic goes, it says you're free to develop your own literary research topic. So again, not all of a sudden doing, a report on wildlife in Africa or just some totally, random thing. We're still working in the same style of essay that we've been doing, throughout the course. The only difference is instead of me telling you to write about expectations in a short story or the theme of gender or whatever, you're just developing that prompt for yourself. So you may choose a particular theme to write about, a particular kind of character or relationship among characters like father or parent-child relationships. And then you can decide, do you want to talk about that idea within just one work, like Death of a Salesman? Again, be relatively easy to get 6 pages with that idea in that work because there's so much going on. And remember, you're integrating a lot of secondary material, so what might feel like just a few points that you want to make can actually expand into a substantial essay fairly easily. And you always want to be fully developed in terms of your ideas and narrowly focused rather than really broadly focused, but just kind of mention a whole bunch of random things that you don't actually develop in any reasonable depth. So narrowly focused and greater depth is really the ideal situation. Okay, your literary paper must cover a work or works of literature, at least one from our syllabus, basically one we've read for the course. So again, it doesn't have to be the play, but that is a really good choice. And if you do decide to discuss more than one primary text, so you might try to do like a comparative sort of thing, how does, the theme of family in Gorilla My Love and Death of a Salesman, for example. You may choose to do sort of a comparative thing. as long as one of those works that you're comparing is from our class, the other one could be just about anything that you're familiar with. It could be a book you've read, a movie you've seen, a TV series you watch, a graphic novel. I mean, there could be lots of choices here, which is, again, one of the reasons that I really encourage you as you're thinking about your topic. Clearly, you're submitting it through Blackboard, but if you're just sort of thinking about ideas and not really sure, is this going to work? Am I allowed to do this? Just be in touch with me. You know, it takes seconds on your part, and I am pretty quick about responding, so you're going to know right away, more or less, whether you're on the right track. And it's important to know that you're on the right track now, early in the process, rather than choose an idea, kind of struggle with it, sort of get further along, time passes really quickly, and then all of a sudden, you have a topic that's not really working, you can't find research stuff on it, and you have just a few days before you're not just doing a draft, but like turning in the final essay. So as has been the case throughout our course, time is really of the essence here. In terms of the rest of Unit 9, you're just submitting a tentative topic. So again, just kind of making that first step about choosing some text, choosing a basic idea. You know, nothing has to be really polished at this point. But something should be in place. You don't want kind of nothing going on at this point, because then you really are going to run out of time. And there's a short Death of a Salesman quiz, again, that hopefully draws your attention to some of the more interesting aspects of that play. And again, highlights the degree to which there's just so much going on that it makes a really good choice to write about for the final paper. There's lots of themes. Research is, relatively speaking, easy to do. It's relatively easy to read and to sort of look back and find important quotes. So there's just lots that works as far as that particular primary text goes. Okay, the other thing that I'll say now, I've said it before, I'll say it again before the class is done, this final paper is like the gold mine for the class. It's 400 points out of a total 1,000, so almost half of your grade. So even if you've made some mistakes up to now, what matters is not the 5 or 10 points that cost you, but making sure you get those mistakes corrected and right, especially if they have to do with sources, in-text citation, formatting your works cited in terms of its overall look, formatting the entries to make sure they're correct. Get that correct because it plays a huge role in your final grade. Then the final paper is obviously a huge component of that overall grade. So MLA citation, finding appropriate, relevant secondary sources, all of that basic stuff that, again, is pretty much, I look at it and yes, the student gets it, no, the student doesn't get it. It's not like I have to interpret or figure stuff out. It's pretty easy. In fact, one of the things that I do when I grade the final essay, I'll open up that document and I scroll right to the bottom to look at the works cited, because if that looks good, then I can pretty much guess that the rest of the paper is going to look good, and we're talking about probably a B or maybe an A paper because that research stuff is in place. If there's all kinds of formatting issues, if there's inappropriate or insufficient number of sources, it doesn't take me long to realize this is unlikely to be a B, so we're already talking about C, and if there's major problems within the body of the paper, that's a failing paper, because that doesn't show me that the student understands like the most fundamental concepts for English 1102, the research class. So it is sort of cut and dried, and like I said before, just use that to your advantage instead of having it work against you. You can really take advantage of that situation instead of being, you know, concerned or worried about it. But it is a lot of points, right? So if you have questions, by all means be in touch, and be in touch sooner rather than later, since you don't want to struggle or worry or spend time kind of not making progress forward. Okay, I'll talk to everybody soon then.